Good evening, you're watching the Chucktown Wind Report. It is Tuesday, February the 2nd, a little after 9 p.m. Let's talk about winds and weather for the next couple of days. And looking at our surface map, today got a little bit tricky. We had this high pressure to the north strengthen and actually keep the wedge of northeast winds going down the coastline. We had a backdoor cold front that pushed down through our area, and right along the back side of it's where we saw some of that wedging going on with east-northeast winds, and it coupled with some east sea breeze oscillations and actually increased along the barrier island beaches. So we got 17, 18 knots, well above the forecast values for speeds. Even though the models did get the directions right, I thought maybe the southerly sea breeze would undercut this afternoon, but just goes to show how tricky things can get. But either way, all of this air is going to become more convergent as this low pressure out here to the west is going to rise up over the Great Lakes and pull this cold front boundary across the country with it. So all of this air that's going to be coming in ahead of the cold front is all convergent because it's all heading towards this low pressure. That's what we mean by convergent flow. So when you have a low up here and then the cold front, all this air is going to converge and ride up along the boundary, and so that's what's going to happen tomorrow. We're going to see southerly winds increase as this boundary, as the frontal boundary approaches the coastline. I think as we go in time, though, this boundary is going to get hung up along the upstate South Carolina, and then it's going to very slowly, piece at a time, start to cross over the coastline. So we're looking at about a 2-day event here with rain starting about tomorrow afternoon. It could last on through Thursday all day and even into Thursday night, and then maybe scoot off the coast by Friday and leave a coastal trough, a residual trough along the coast with some northerly winds. And then we also have to watch for these secondary cold fronts and even tertiary cold fronts that drop down below these lows as they come up here. So we could see a fanning out of fronts where you get a double cold front and a triple cold front, where you have southerly winds come up ahead, northwesterlies behind on the post-frontal flow, and then southerlies again, and you get some variability in there. So basically that means for Thursday, especially Thursday, is where you get this a little bit more variable wind in the forecast. When we get into Friday, I think we're going to see our northerlies really start to wedge down even into Saturday as this Arctic air mass moves into the area and cools things down for a couple of days. So just a quick little shot of cold air before next week, when we're seeing a really heavy-duty Arctic surge sometime midweek to late week. It's getting really far ahead in the forecast for now, but just know that winter is not over yet. If we take a quick look at GRE on radar, here's our severe thunderstorm line moving across Mississippi and even up into Tennessee and Kentucky, moving into Alabama now. Some reported tornadoes on the ground, some really severe weather. That doesn't mean that we're going to have severe weather over our area, even though the WPC from NOAA does have us under marginal risk. We do have our cooler shelf waters right here along the coastline that tend to stabilize the environment where thunderstorms might develop. So that doesn't mean we won't have thunderstorms. We could easily get southwest to northeast traveling thunderstorms coming across the state up from Savannah and into the Charleston area. But we sometimes do end up getting some help from our ocean because the water temperatures are about 52 degrees, and sometimes that helps to sort of stabilize the environment and thwart thunderstorming. Doesn't mean we won't get rain, because we could see quite a bit of that, 2 to 3 inches to be exact. We could even see more locally in some areas, but I think starting tomorrow afternoon and into tomorrow night, we might see a few isolated showers here and there. Right now this environment is pretty dry, so we look pretty high and dry for tonight. Maybe some patchy fog in the morning over these low-lying areas where moist areas are, especially over the waters, because we have such warm air in the area. It does look rather dry, so relative humidity are going to be on the lower side, but that could change overnight as some of this clouding moves up into the area. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and close this out and move into the jet stream. So this is one of the reasons why this is all occurring right now. The jet stream has this huge dip going all the way down into New Mexico and into Texas, and then you can see with this low pressure on the surface map earlier, the low pressure is centered right about here, and it's going to be heading up towards the Great Lakes, and that's riding along this jet stream dip. And as time goes on, if we look at even into tomorrow afternoon, you see that southwest and northeast flow, that's that convergent flow ahead of the cold front, that's what's driving it across the country. And then we see the polar jet stream dip down and meet it and then sharpen as we get into Thursday, and that's where a lot of our rain is going to continue. And this is one of the reasons why the front's going to get stalled out over our area, because there's nowhere really for it to go. It's being caught up along this jet stream. And then as we get further into Friday and into Saturday, that's when we get that westerly push, pushes everything out, but then we do get some colder temperatures as a result of that. So Storm Prediction Center, as I said earlier, we have it under marginal risk. I'll be watching the area closest to the water, the beaches, Some of the immediate coastlines probably not going to have as much of an effect from convective potentials or thunderstorming, but like I said, it doesn't mean it won't happen. It just means that's a more stable environment for things not to occur. Look, here's our plume viewer, and if we look at the timeline for when the rain's going to start, it's suggesting sometime late morning to midday, and then continuing all the way on through Friday. So some of these members actually go, it looks like kind of a mess, but some of the members go a little bit higher on their marks, and a combined total could bring us up to, it looks like we could even see 2.5 to 2.75 inches along this higher member. So we can't ever rule those out, even though the mean average says about 1.5 inches or close to it. We always want to look at the higher mark as well and kind of put a mark in between that. So we could see anywhere from 1.5 to 2.5, going on 3 inches locally, according to the plume viewer, throughout this entire event for the next 3 to 4 days. All right, so getting on to the winds, here's Datascope. And here we go right now with the radar. You can see the radar and the severe thunderstorms in the red. And also, one thing to note is the winds, and you can see this northeast wedge still going down the coastline. Even right now, we're seeing 14 knots along the beaches and even 15 in the harbor. But here's our southerly flow right here from that Atlantic high pressure, and you can even see all this southerly convergence going up ahead. All these stations are reading some higher marks now as the winds increase ahead of that cold front, and that's going to be expected. So let me go ahead and disable the radar on this one. Oops, give me just a sec. And I'm going to zoom into the Charleston area now and take a quick look around and see what's going on for winds. And again, this is the Datascope professional viewer from WeatherFlow that I'm looking at here. So here we are with the east-northeast winds still continuing tonight, 13 knots with surges to 18 knots and lulls right around 10 knots. And that's going to continue probably through the night until the morning time when those winds switch up from the south as that cold front draws a little bit closer from the west. At Folly Beach Piers at 13 knots. Gusting to 16 knots, and even inside the harbor seeing more of an easterly flow there as the night continues. So here's our model forecast. Remember, the sea surface temperatures are 52 degrees, so the southerly winds, and I did want to talk about this before we go to those modeling effects. So when we have southerly winds coming up the coastline, a lot of times this cooler shelf water, which is, like I said, about 52 degrees, has a tendency to decouple winds. There isn't really any surface mixing going on because the winds are coming in off the cooler ocean, and even where it meets land, there isn't enough of a gradient to be established because all this air is cooler. So where it could be, 80 degrees inland, sometimes along the beaches, it's still cooler, closer to those water temperatures. It could be 58 to 60 degrees, and it's likely going to happen tomorrow, as even being in the warm air sector, the southerly flow is onshore flow right off the ocean, keeps things cooler and even more stable. However, when we get inland, where we actually get some mixing, where this warmer land is radiating, we get some this wind actually settles down just inside the harbor mouth. So I'm expecting the winds to really kind of settle down just inside the harbor, and even inland we'll probably see some gusting ahead of that cold front along the prefrontal build and low-level jetting. So we'll have to look at the low-level jetting profile as well tomorrow to see what's going to happen. But we could easily say for tomorrow we're going to be about 10 to 14 knots along the beaches as a maximum, unless we get some better surface mixing. And then back here we could see 18 to 22 knots. And that's very common, where we have a very distinct line where this warmer land actually causes some surface mixing and allows for the build. And we could even see this sensor right here read 20 knots, and this sensor right here, and even the Isle of Palm sensor in Folly Beach, might only read 7 or 8. So very, very possible to happen tomorrow. So that makes it very difficult to call for a forecast. I'm going to call for 10 to 14 knots along the beaches on a south-southwesterly flow. And then inside the harbor and inland, I'm going to call for 14 to 18 knots with gusting up into the low to mid-20s at times along that turbulent low-level jetting. So it depends on how fast that cold front approaches from the west and how strong it's going to be as to how strong the low-level jets will allow for that. And of course, once the rain enters the picture, it sort of makes things messy and it takes away from it all. But the beaches could see a little bit of enhancement from sea breezing if the air does stay dry through the afternoon and the coast can stay dry with sunshine. That may allow for maybe even a 12 to 16 knot flow develop. So we'll have to wait and see what goes on there. But as far as Thursday goes, that's going to be a very tricky one, because if we get a secondary or third cold front drop down, that can make things very variable. So we're only going to go with northwest winds with southerly pulses and sort of a variable mix there. We'll go ahead and take a look at the modeling now. And here we go. So as far as tomorrow's concerned, here we go. All the models are in agreement with southerly flow. Of course, the speeds vary anywhere from 10 to 20 knots, and that's going to be the norm. So, there's going to be a lot of play there, especially along the beaches and to the inland locales. I think this number might be a little bit low. This is Folly Beach Pier modeling, so the inland models might actually be a little bit higher. Let's go ahead and take a quick look at the rest of the week. This is GFS 0.5. Here's the forecast for Folly Beach. And this one's saying 17 knots from the south-southwest. As we get later in the day, of course, we know the marine layering and decoupling issues could keep that lower. So still, again, calling 10 to 14 knots. And here's Thursday, where there shows some variable. Now, this model is showing northwest winds, whereas the NAM, I think, was showing some westerlies and even some southerlies mixed in there, some variableness. We could see a dominant northwest feature, but we'll have to wait and see for that Thursday morning. As we get into Friday and into the weekend, that's where the winds really crank up. Sunday is all about suggestion of a low pressure system off of our coast interacting with high pressure to the northwest to create a strong gradient, but that's a little far out to tell right now, and I wouldn't go by that. I wouldn't go by this model only. We'll wait until Friday to take a look, Friday and Saturday to take a look at Sunday to see if that's going to happen. There's some pretty high numbers, and it very well could, especially with all that cold air dropping down from Canada. So like I said, I'll be back on Friday night to take a look and see what we're going to be going through on the weekend as far as our cold snap and cooler air with some higher northerly winds. And that's going to do it for the Chucktown Wind Report. So until then, stay safe and thanks for watching.